Hello and welcome to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Summit 2020. My name is Emma Chow, lead of the Foundation's Food Initiative, and I'll be your host for this session where we'll be exploring circular economy for food. We'll be focusing on the role of cities. Today, cities are these endpoints driving a highly linear food system. But cities, as destinations for about 80% of the world's food by 2050, have the opportunity to reimagine their role and actually be these positive catalysts driving food system transformation based on circular economy principles. Today, we'll hear from speakers from around the world who joined us earlier this year during the inaugural Big Food Workshop. We'll hear from thought leaders, practitioners, and representatives from New York, London, and São Paulo, and innovators. These speakers and sessions have reached people, over 30,000 people around the world in over 100 countries. First up, we'll hear from two thought leaders in the space, author and architect Carolyn Steele and Professor Emerita at the University of Toronto, Harriet Friedman.
Just very briefly, I'm an architect by training. Studied at Cambridge, taught at Cambridge for many years and the London School of Economics. But then I had this kind of light bulb moment, I guess, kind of in April, in April 2000. And that light bulb moment was the idea of what it would be to describe a city through food. And that very quickly became the question of what it takes to feed a city. And I wrote the book that you kindly mentioned, Hungry City, which came out in 2008. And I guess it came out, at a time when there was growing awareness of the fact that we hadn't, as it were, solved the food problem. And indeed, it was, of course, the year of the financial crash and also the year that, many, many countries saw food riots and so on. And out of that book, I kind of developed this idea that really food shapes our lives in many ways that we both do and do not see. And I invented a word for that, which is Citopia, which is now, as you kindly said in your introduction, the title of my second book. And that just comes from the Greek word sitos for food and topos for place. And the basic premise is that we live in a world that's shaped by food, but we don't really see many of its effects. But actually, food shapes so many aspects of our lives that we can use it as a wonderful connective tool to think about the problems that we face in a connected way and also to affect real change. So it's really become my kind of lens through which I see the world, I guess. And both Plato and Aristotle actually talk about the need for the city to remain small, because basically the bigger it gets, the further and further away it gets from its sources of sustenance. It's a kind of geometrical problem, if you like. So for both of them, the ideal was a kind of what I call the fried egg, approach to urbanity, which is that the city is a kind of like the yolk in the middle and the white is the countryside around. Now, the word oikonomia actually means household management. So it's from oikos, which is the Greek for house, and nomos, which is the Greek for management, as you would assume, and from what I've just said. And basically the ideal for them was that every citizen would have a house in the city and a farm in the countryside, and the farm would feed the house. So oikos nomos, or oikonomia, is basically the fact that every household is self-sufficient because it has a little patch of land that feeds it. And then you multiply that up many times, and then the city itself becomes self-sufficient because everybody has a little farm on the outside. And this, for both Plato and Aristotle, was the ideal of the city. So once there were enough people in the city that it could sort of, had the division of labor necessary to kind of, mend shoes and kind of build furniture and so on, then it should grow no bigger, because, if it remained small, then it would be possible for it to become self-sufficient, which they both saw as the sort of the key to its political autonomy. And I mean, very interestingly, Aristotle warned against another Greek word, krematistike, which interestingly we have not adopted as the root of one of our modern words. I wonder why that could be. But essentially, that is the making of money for its own sake. And I think it's deeply ironic that actually that's pretty much what our modern economics actually do. But Aristotle said there was no point in this because there was never a point at which you reached a balance, because there's never a point at which you have enough money. Whereas if your aim is to reach a balance between city and country, then there is a point at which that can be reached. So I think it's a super, super interesting concept for our time in showing us everything that's wrong with our economics. If I could just say one thing really quickly as well on this very important point, food is the most valuable thing in our lives. We have to have food every day, otherwise we die. So food really is life. And the fact that we've predicated our economics and indeed politics on the existence of something called cheap food, which cannot and does not exist, and we've created the illusion of it by externalizing its true costs, is, in my view, the problem. So what I call Setopian economics is the idea that we re-embed the value in food and base our new economy around it. So then the question is, how do you design the world so that, and this is my formulation, I call it maximizing the urban-rural interface, which is basically finding ways at any scale. So this could be growing herbs on your kitchen roof, kitchen sort of windowsill, or it could be on a roof, or, it could be community gardens in a housing estate, or it could be to do with, very critically, the city's relationship with its local region and strengthening that relationship. But in any case, the way we design cities and the way we design, as it were, countryside, because we design both, and that's also something we tend to forget. I think if we do it with the idea of maximizing the interface in mind, so the fried egg model I spoke about earlier is one way of doing that, but clearly cities don't look like fried eggs these days. So you can also post-fit productive landscape into the city. This is another way of doing it. But however you do it, I think, to rebalance, to recalibrate the relationship between urban and rural is what I'm really talking about. And it seems to me that if we're going to go forward into a kind of a good, low or zero carbon life in, towards mid-century, then people having access to both the city and the country is really critical. And of course, the internet can help us with this, because as we're discovering during the lockdown of COVID, people are actually discovering they don't have to be physically in a city in order to be connected. So I think there's huge latent potential here to rethink, the rural economy and the urban economy in the light of this idea that, if we have access to people and to nature, we don't need much else. And neither of those things have to destroy the planet.
So that's what I'm doing here. And I'm reinterpreting the way that cities got from what Aristotle described, or Carolyn described, to linear systems, very far-reaching systems. And I think we have to reinterpret the colonial history as a city commodity frontier history, that's trying to come forward, not just from me, but from a number of people now. That London was the center of the emergent British Empire, and London emerged as a global city from its ancient roots by financing the sugar trade, by financing the slave trade to make it happen, and that these completely simplified by complex biocultural landscapes in Africa, where many young people were taken out, where maize was brought in as a new subsistence food, and in the Caribbean, where indigenous people were completely decimated. The forested landscape was completely transformed, and three introduced, because I don't believe that we want to get back to something falsely called native all the time, but that the three things that were introduced were the colonial landowners, in this case British, but also French or Dutch, African laborers enslaved, and sugar, which is an Asian plant. And all of this created a simplified and completely different ecosystem that was the beginning of biocultural landscape, that was the beginning of something that was to proceed through phases until now. At the same time, urbanization, those Asian words suggest that there's something inevitable about it, and there's nothing inevitable about it. That the city of London and then later cities grew up in relation to these very long distance supply of materials and energy into the city, that is to the metabolism of the city, and completely transformed their own countrysides from suppliers of the city to other places, to places that became specialized in various ways, marginal in various ways, so that the growth of cities and the growth of not global exactly, but translocal supply chains has been a different way to think about the history that we've lived for 500 years. So understanding how it all became linear, I think, is crucial to bringing it back. And just to add one more, I think, crucial point here is that even when the peri-urban area is a huge part of the food supply of the world, from city to city, it doesn't necessarily supply that city. So since the 1990s, with the supermarkets taking over long distance supply chains, the peri-urban area, very fertile around Toronto, that produced all of our fruits and vegetables, got converted pretty quickly to producers of monocultural carrots and onions for export, while the supermarkets were bringing in carrots and onions from wherever it worked for them to source it. So we have to, and we've started reshifting that. We started little bits of this emergent reconnecting of the city and the countryside here, but that's what we have to work with.
Now that we've heard from some thought leaders, let's turn it over to representatives from our 3 partner cities on the Food Initiative, London, São Paulo, and New York. From London, we'll hear from Claire Pritchard, Chair of the London Food Board. From New York, we'll hear from Kate McKenzie, Director of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy. And from São Paulo, Luis Alvaro, Secretary of International Affairs.
I actually don't think that our priorities have shifted at all. We are focused certainly on increasing food security. That is certainly top of mind and most important. Our mayor Mayor Bill de Blasio has made it a commitment that no New Yorker will go hungry at any time, and in particular during COVID. It's particularly challenging given that pre-COVID, we had about 1.2 million New Yorkers who experienced food insecurity. And that number may have, in fact, doubled as a result of some of the economic conditions that resulted from COVID. Of particular note, the month of April here saw the largest 1-month increase in enrollment in our SNAP program, otherwise formerly known as food stamps, with an additional 68,000 New Yorkers enrolling for the program, which is the largest increase ever, to be honest. So our expressions and desires around food security are incredibly top of mind. As I mentioned, we're delivering every day more than 1 million meals in either grab-and-go locations around the city at more than 500 schools, as well as deploying our taxis to deliver meals to New Yorkers who are particularly seniors who are following guidance and staying indoors.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, a lot of that resonates. There are some strong similarities, many similarities between New York and London. So yeah, just over a year ago, in early 2019, we published the Mayor's London Food Strategy, and it's a fully integrated strategy. So when we talked about the partners that Kate and Louis described earlier, transport and business and education, it's a very integrated strategy. And it sets out our plan to help all Londoners, as very similar to Kate, access a healthy, affordable and sustainable food, regardless of their background or circumstances. That strategy very much embraces the vision statement for the Food Flagship Initiative in London, a city where everyone enjoys food that is deeply valued, sustainably produced and never wasted. And we really see the cultural and celebratory value of food in terms of convening and celebrating this incredible city. So in every sense, that strategy was a recovery strategy to begin with, so even more pertinent now. The strategy recognised the significant role the mayor, the boroughs, London businesses, the public sector and everyone that lives and works in London can play in that recovery. And so we talk about good food at home and that those underlying causes of household food insecurity Kate was talking about, referring to good food businesses and particularly the circular food economy, but also good wages, good employers. Good food in all our public institutions, so all of the public sector procurement and how that supports good food production, good food in maternity, giving people the right start, supporting our parents and babies to start with the right food, to give them to start with the right relationship with food, potentially not sucking from plastic, but proper food to begin with, and good food for the environment. So to highlight some of these significant events of the last year, and particularly since the current crisis, so in London, before COVID, we were also dealing with the potential crisis of a no-deal Brexit. And we've been focused on resilience planning with the uncertainty concerning the UK's exit from the EU. And the Food Board and colleagues at the GLA and other partners had already anticipated the situation we started to face at the beginning of this crisis. So panic buying, shortages or perceived shortages, increased household poverty, and a further polarisation of access to healthy, sustainable, affordable food. So the strategy recognised the importance of household food insecurity, and the Mayor committed, and this is the first time in the UK, to creating a measurement of household food insecurity. And that this was exposed even further during the crisis, and inequalities have been exacerbated in this city. So the crisis has brought into stark focus that inequality of access. So many of us were aware of this, but I think this crisis, this access to food and how important food is in our world has come to the top of so many minds. And I think people so typically took it for granted. So I think in a way that's it is a silver lining. So just on a couple of the other areas, as a response to the crisis, we had the creation of the London Food Alliance, which has been a great response to redistribution of surplus food, a coordinated response across all of our London boroughs. And what we've resulted in is a new strategic partnership and a greater awareness in every London borough. We've also had the creation of the mutual aid network that has developed since the crisis began and has seen an organisation of huge civil movement, often with supporting access to good food at their heart. But many are here to stay and already working in areas like creating online allotments, sharing plants with social distancing, and online cookery classes. And the Alliance work will contribute to tackling things like food waste. So the Mayor committed to a target to reduce food waste by 20% by 2025 and 50% by 2030. And I think the awareness about the value of food has been increased. And I think what's been achieved over the last few months will contribute towards that agenda. And in partnership with Capital Growth and Sustain, in early March, we hosted a fringe farming event at the beginning of March, aiming to understand the barriers to a significant step change in urban and peri-urban agriculture. And during this crisis, our partner Sustain have asked boroughs to commit to a huge step change in the way that they are supporting this. And I'm really pleased to hear that boroughs are responsive. So it's great to see political leaders that didn't even consider food to really go all the way down the path to thinking about where this food comes from. So I'm very confident and positive about the future here in London.
Earlier in the introduction, we were laying out that initial overview of the vision of a cities and of a circular economy for food for cities, and identifying these areas for action. So regenerative food production, sourcing from local production where applicable, and eliminating the concept of waste. I'd really be interested if you could just share an example from your city of what a concrete example is. So Kate, if we can go back to you over in New York.
Sure, thank you for that. So, one of the examples that I'll speak to is work that we have underway around good food purchasing. And as I mentioned, we're also, how that connects to sort of the COVID work is thinking through the, where we're pulling and where we're able to source through products for emergency home delivery. And so awareness about, transportation coming into the city, the types of companies that we want to do business with. And also, I would say some of the vulnerabilities here around, for us, we're really ensuring that right now we need to make sure that these home delivered meals are shelf stable. And so the challenges around that are not being able to bring in as much fresh and to support our regional economies in the way that we'd like to, because we have such bountiful growers, right? And the fact that they largely supply restaurants who just in the next few weeks, we'll start to bring back some of the restaurants. But there's a tremendous economic ripple from the fact that some of those restaurants, many of those restaurants, have not been able to supply to serve that food, and of course then again from the supply chain of being able to bring in that product. So the need for these values is again just amplified significantly over the course of setting up new contracts for emergency home delivery. And I think that, again, the sort of value system on local economies and trying to do as much as we possibly can within our region, identifying some of the key challenges there that might have to do with infrastructure, particularly refrigeration. And this is not new, but again, it's front and center in our mind as we think about how do we bring in product in boxes and ways to deliver to hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers when we have an incredible vulnerability around limited refrigeration capacity. So those are examples about things that we can think about as we're redesigning and thinking about the blue sky picture for food system opportunities. And then I would also say, just to connect to sort of the full cycle here, looking at, of course, we have in this country, the largest institutional food provision through our Department of Education, which because schools have been shut down for such a tremendous amount of time, they're actually distributing some of the product that they've had on hand and through a donation to ensure, again, that product doesn't go to waste. So really keeping in mind not just the supply of the food, but also the full cycle to ensure that we're really capitalizing on all elements of that system. Again, I will just say that those core principles of the circular economy, I'm so glad that we sort of our last sort of in-person moment back in February left us on a note of positivity and of commitment. And now this entire situation that we're faced with, it's really looking at it with again, I think to Claire's point, with a very positive note about how we can redesign for the future to be even more resilient.
I was thinking of a bit of a focus on hospitality and food industry. And as Kate says, it's been the hardest hit industry, and where some financial support has been put in place, is often our food industry has missed out on those. So the food and hospitality sector has been critically hit by this crisis. And as the world starts to reopen post-COVID, we think we have a unique opportunity, which is actually time typically missing from the catering and food industry, as well as urgent need to support the industry to reopen right and build back better for the benefit of our future generations. So the GLA, there's a number of things that we're doing currently, and this has given us a new focus for this work. So the GLA is currently undertaking a piece of research evaluating the business support available across London in order to embed those food strategy principles. So the idea of circular economy is part of the business incubation and business training support. So it's a comprehensive agenda. But also that we now have the adult learning budget now sits with the mayor. So that's £300 million a year of devolved budget to the mayor. So but also a greater opportunity to provide access to training across the business, across the city, training and business support, which will help to create more jobs and businesses that contribute to the circular and resilient food system. And this combined with the mayor's role in regeneration, for example, the previous good growth programmes that ensure where businesses are incubated and are funded with support from the mayor, incubate good food businesses that we hope are part of a circular food economy.
Louise, let's hear from you.
Well, when we're going to talk about one of a practical circular economy practice that we have here, first we got to address some of the challenges of the city. So I would say that the first big challenge of São Paulo is definitely the city's dimension, its size, high level in its high level urbanization. So every policy must be designed in a great scale. What is difficult if we don't have a strong governance and the involvement of local and diversified stakeholders. A second challenge I would say is the city's levels of inequalities. So it is common to urban centers of the global south. One of the effects of this inequality is food insecurity due to difficult access to quality food and high consumption of industrialized food. So even though São Paulo counts with a solid legislation regarding food security, in a groundbreaking food and nutritional security municipal plan. It has given us the structure and condition to implement an efficient model of food security in the city, enabling many other initiatives. But I would highlight the Connecting the Dots initiative that we have. So as I mentioned before, we do have 1 million students from kindergarten to 14 years old that are the municipality responsibility. So in our municipal schools, we serve 2,300,000 daily meals. And of course, we want to serve them the best we can. The other dot that we had to connect is that we have 33% of our city's territory reserved to familiar agriculture, and we would like to keep them there. It is a protection for the city. It is healthy food being produced, and it's important for us to have that kind of a green belt around the city. So what we did is that the municipality can buy food produced organically by these families in their small rural properties, and then we have a logistics system that we deliver those into each and every school, and we serve healthier food for our kids, protecting the familiar agriculture, protecting economy, protecting the city with this green belt, and having healthier food for our smaller kids in the city. So this is my favorite one. This is the one that I would like to highlight.
To fully harness the potential of cities as places to catalyze positive food system transformation, it's not just the municipalities, who we just heard from, who have a role to play. Equally, the private sector has a big role to play. Now we'll hear from Gauthier Bowles, Director of Circular Economy at Yara International, and Chico Souza, the founder of Greenplat, an innovator based in Brazil.
How we are addressing waste recovery and valorization, we need to have first this nutrient upcycling alliance, something that we have created through the partnership we have with Veolia on circular economy. So the starting point is that we realize that with this partnership, we are actually each of our company at one or the other hand of the linear food system. So with Yara bringing agricultural inputs on one hand, and with Veolia managing the waste on the other hand. And so we think that via partnership, we are actually connecting these two hands and making the circular food value chain happen. Obviously, this is very ambitious, and we know that we will not succeed on our own, and that's why we have developed this alliance where we want the other players of the food value chain to be involved from all levels, so farmers, food companies, retailers, cities, and so on. And so that's why we have launched this initiative that is now anchored as one of the core projects of the MacArthur Foundation Food Initiative. So in one sentence, we present it as a business-driven alliance of food value chain players with the goal to promote and develop the upcycling of nutrients in agriculture and the food sector. So now getting also a bit more in the other activities that Yara has, or the view we have on circular economy and agriculture. It's obvious circular economy is part of the future of agriculture. So it's now also part of Yara's strategy for the future. It's a global trend, no doubt, but there are also new regulations coming that very practically are targeting our business and that are also paving the way for more sustainable agriculture and for a more circular agriculture. So we are addressing this via several initiatives. One is to recover pure nutrients as a secondary raw material in the production of existing products. So we are there replacing virgin raw materials by circular ones. Another option we have is to optimize the recovery and use of organic nutrients, so from different type of waste streams. And we are there producing, for instance, organic or organo-mineral fertilizers that needs to answer farmer needs in terms of yield, in terms of environment, and obviously also in terms of profitability. And via that second target, we are also looking at soil improvement with all the benefits on water retention, nutrient retention, soil structure, and so on. So all benefits for the agriculture.
So to drive data with this, we create a software as a service solution in a pilot in the city of São Paulo that we start to track waste generators, okay, to collect data and to drive for better solutions. In less than 1 year, we start to track more than 650,000 companies in the city of São Paulo, more than 20,000 tons of waste per day.
Thank you so much for tuning into this session. If you'd like to learn more about the Food Initiative and to watch the full sessions that feature these speakers, go ahead and check out the Food Initiative webpage on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website.